know what, Jamie? Let's pop off right now. We got to get started.
We got to go.
Let's go. Let's go. Let's get the people in the chat. Hello, everyone, and welcome to Hit and Hustle from IrishSportsDaily.com. I am your host, Grateful Lamong, and with me, as always, is Jamie Uwayama, Mr. Jamie University. It is Tuesday, January 9th, 2024. This is our first show of the new year. Jamie, first of all, Happy New Year, Jamie.
Happy New Year to you
and your family, and to everyone listening in the chat. We've got some unhappy people in the chat already. Jamie Pops is sick to his stomach. Couldn't sleep last night. Got no sleep. Coach Humph is upset. Mr. Sanders says he has manic depression has set in. Please come back to us, Mr. Sanders. It's gonna be okay. Joe Bro says Happy New Year. It's gonna be okay, everybody. It's a bad football year, right? There's two asks that I have every year. If it's not gonna be Notre Dame, no Michigan, no USC. That's all I asked for, and it didn't happen for us last year. Michigan wins the national championship, and it's going to be tainted. It will be tainted going forward, and I think history will show that. And I think it's okay to talk about that, Ty Hildenbrand. It's okay to talk about that there is a scandal, and they've alleged
Notre Dame fan, Ty Hildenbrand.
Yeah. So there's been an alleged cheating scandal going on for the last 3 years. It's okay to talk about that, big guy. So you can talk about those things. We're going to talk about kind of just put a cap on 2023 season. We're going to give some big picture ideas on Notre Dame and college football and where they're at, and then what they have going forward to 2024. What are they set up to go for a title run? I actually kind of think they might be, Jamie. There are some flaws that I think are a little bit Rajon, you got to say alleged, because if you don't, there's lawyers out there. There's lawyers out there, Rajon. You got to say alleged cheating. But I think there's some flaws on the Notre Dame football team, especially given what we saw last night and just kind of throughout the playoffs and what you need to make a run at the national championship. But I think Notre Dame's closer in a lot of areas, and I think it's going to be a exciting 2024 season. It's a new year, Jamie, and a lot of people, they do their New Year's resolutions, new year, new you, all those things. And part of becoming a new person or improving yourself is upgrading your wardrobe. And one thing you can do is you can go over to ESQclothing.com. That's created the world's first bamboo dress shirt. It's crafted from high-quality bamboo fabric. It's the softest and most comfortable dress shirt you'll ever put on. Not only more sustainable than cotton, but also feels cooler, has stretch, is odor and wrinkle-resistant. It's even machine washable. You've seen ESQ's one-piece collar bamboo dress shirt on all your favorite Notre Dame players and coaches. It's the perfect shirt for today's business meeting or heading for a night out. Use ISD 15 to get 15% off all online items. That's ISD 15 for 15% off all online items. Jamie, do you have a take on yesterday's game, the playoffs at large? We haven't done a show since the semifinals. Tommy Rees, you didn't come through for us. It's unfortunate to have that happen. But what is your take on the game last night, the playoffs at large, and all those things in between?
Like we kind of mentioned, just Greg and I were talking off the air right before this, like Michigan really, the stars aligned for them in that Georgia didn't make it, because Georgia is the team that absolutely matches up the best with Michigan and is probably better than them at what Michigan is good at. So from that perspective, and then they have Brock Bowers and stuff too. So it's like they have that, and they're a more explosive offense too. So they would probably win the game. Unfortunately, they lost to Alabama in the SEC championship game, and they got left out because of that. So really, the best kind of matchup for them was Alabama, and Alabama had to beat them, and Alabama obviously didn't. And you could say Tommy Rees didn't. I mean, he didn't call a good game in that game, but I also think like you got Alabama. Alabama wasn't good. Alabama this year, they weren't. And they're specifically their O-line. Like for Alabama to not even be a semifinalist for the Joe Moore Award is like insane when you think about how they recruit on the O-line every year. And they just weren't that good on the O-line this year. And I mean, that proved to be the point. They got whooped against Michigan in that game, specifically against the pass. And I think in this game, it was just one of these things where Penix had to be lights out if they were going to win the game. And he obviously wasn't close to that. And because they didn't match up well, like Washington's defense didn't match up well with Michigan. And even Michigan actually didn't even really play that well for large.
Yeah, they had the explosives early, and then they did basically nothing for 2.5 quarters. They didn't really do anything at all.
They had some good stuff where they did some, unbalanced looks stuff. Kind of similar to what Notre Dame did at the end of the Clemson game, where they were, and then they were running duo, and then you saw there was confusion. Just they missed gaps in the run game and the run fits, and that was that, right? And then that's why a guy's running there. It wasn't even like, I mean, they blocked it well, but it wasn't like they destroyed them there. It was just like, well, nobody's in this gap, and Donovan Edwards just running right through it. So I think, that was obviously a big factor in the game. And the fact that they had some busts in Michigan too. They just couldn't take advantage of it. Washington couldn't take advantage of it really. So I think the one thing is that I mean, obviously any true Notre Dame fan isn't happy today because of, Michigan winning, but I think the way to look, there's two ways to look at it on the bright side of this, if there is a bright side. One, like you said, Greg, there's always going to be the asterisk beside them the entire time. That's going to be there. And believe me, this is not going to be the end of what happened in terms of there's going to be more to the story of this. And then obviously, Harbaugh's going to the NFL. It's just so obvious he's going to the NFL too. And who knows what's going to happen to their coaching staff. Someone mentioned about they got the 45 seniors on. A lot of those guys are going to be gone, right? Some of these guys have extra 60 or could be super seniors or whatever. But a good chunk of them are. So they're probably going to have 15 NFL draft picks or whatever, right? I saw Jim Nagy from the Senior Bowl projected that they had 14 draftable guys. So they're going to lose a ton. And they're still going to have talent, but they're just not going to be ready to roll the way that everything was set up for them to win this year. So they're going to take at least a small step back, maybe even a big one, right? So, and the other thing is that you can look at it is this was the first year in 6 years. So this was for 5 straight years, only juggernauts won the national championship. You had to be just the absolute peak elite in every category. And if you weren't, no shot. You couldn't win. So that was Georgia with their back-to-back teams, Alabama, the Clemson 2018 team, the 2019 LSU team, which was a juggernaut too. You had to be at that level to win. So Michigan kind of got lucky this year because there really wasn't a juggernaut. The closest thing to kind of checking all those boxes was Georgia. And this wasn't, and it really was kind of Georgia after they had lost 25 draft picks in the last 2 years. So they weren't, at the same kind of level. It's more of a transition year for Georgia. Even the fact that they only lost one game just shows kind of where Georgia's at as a program this year. And obviously just destroyed the whatever, squad that Florida State put out there. But, they didn't have, this was the first year a team won without a super explosive passing game, without dudes at wide receivers. They got good players at wide receiver. I'm not saying Michigan doesn't have good players. The guys who are going to play in the league, they're not going to be stars in the league. They're not going to be high picks, right?
Right.
Corn Johnson isn't going to be a dude. He's fine. But, if Corn Johnson was on Notre Dame, people would be like, oh, great. And that's it. He's not, he's not, he's not Jamar Chase or anything. Right. So I think that's where, if you're looking at it and you're looking at kind of where Notre Dame's at, you're like, well, that is a recipe that Notre Dame, because that's obviously where Notre Dame has struggled when they haven't had dudes at the skill positions. They've been, not quite there on offense. It's like, well, now you can kind of see a bit of a formula for that. And that was what Michigan did. And, you gotta hand it to the players. I'll give it to the players, not the coaches who knowingly cheated and all that, or,
Right.
allegedly cheated. But, you hand it to the players because those guys went out there and performed. And I don't think, I don't think there's a lot of like villains. Like Blake Corum isn't a villain, on their team. The villain is Jim Harbaugh, and you can look at guys on the staff for that.
Yeah. I mean, like you just look at the game. Like I think Michigan was clearly better, right? Like they were better than Washington for sure. They scuffled though. They scuffled for 2.5 quarters, and I think like it never got to the point where like Michigan was truly in trouble, right? Like it was 20-13. And it just, you got to go back to the holding calls, because that was the part where the game definitely changed, right? Which isn't to say it cost Washington the game. I don't know that, because a drive later, Washington had the big pass that led to nothing, right? It actually led to a pick down to the 2-yard line or whatever it is, right? So we don't know how the Washington drive would have ultimately ended, but it's 20-13. They get the long pass to Roma Donze, and then it's called back for holding, which I watched the whole game. It's that, given what was happening, that is not a holding call for that specific game, right? It's the only holding call they made all game. It's really bad. Not to mention the fact that then they have to go punt. Michigan's first play, they hit the big pass. The guy's getting grabbed by his shirt, and he can't. It's like you can't. That like we talk a lot about like selective officiating and why that's the biggest problem.
It was the tackle for Michigan too, so it was like the right tackles on both teams. So it was just
So it's like the same guy, and you let one go, and you call one, and one team gets the benefit, and the other team doesn't, and then the game's effectively over, right? Like so that's. But like again, those are kind of the breaks that you're talking about, right? Where it's like everything kind of lines up for you. And every team needs this, by the way. It's not just a Michigan thing. Like everyone needs that kind of luck, right? Where it's the look, we talk about like their offense, and they're like, everyone talks about how they're the best offense. Bill Connolly, the best offense, like, or the SB plus number. Like, look, They didn't do much of anything on offense against Penn State. They ran the ball like 40 straight times, something like that. They didn't do much of anything on offense against Ohio State. They got the turnovers. They got 20 regulation points against Alabama, and they're sitting there with 20 points middle fourth quarter against Washington. Maybe the worst defense that's ever showed up in the college football championship.
Oklahoma's had worse, but it's outside of Oklahoma.
In the championship game. In the
championship game, yes.
Yeah, not the playoffs. I mean, barring TCU last year, right? So those are the last two. But like you can't really move the ball offensively against Washington, who everyone's moving the ball against Washington. Like everyone with a good offense is moving the ball against Washington, and they're not, right? But it lines up for them, right? And look, to your point, like the players went out there and they did the thing, right? They had a weak run up leading into it with Penn State and Ohio State, one of the worst Ohio State teams in recent history, right? And you pointed it out at the time, like the difference between Notre Dame and Michigan against Ohio State this year is Michigan made the pick at the end, and Notre Dame didn't. And literally the difference between the two teams. And so that's how it goes, right? And so like when we talk about 2024 and how close Notre Dame is, like that's a good example. Like that's a like opponent that both teams played. They both played them at home, right? And so it's just like that's how you can gauge it. And so I think that with Notre Dame, as we kind of talk about Notre Dame here, like people talk, it's different now too because of the playoffs, right? you have to beat basically 4 straight. In the way that Notre Dame is, like, you have to beat 4 straight top 12 teams in order to win a championship now.
Yeah.
And that's never been the case. Notre Dame has not won a playoff game, period. So that just the way that it's set up makes it a lot harder, right? And I think just like looking back at 2023 too, there is, and I guess it kind of gets corrected with Riley Leonard a little bit, but there's always that like physicality at quarterback. Like even Stetson Bennett for Georgia. He's not a physical guy, but like his mobility was a huge asset to their football team. Obviously, JJ McCarthy's mobility is a huge asset to their football team, right? And then you look at my Penix, who it's like great passer, but when it's time to get in a game like this, you can't run your quarterback. If your quarterback is not a mobile and physical player, then they don't have to send a bunch of numbers. They can just push you around, and they don't have to worry about the quarterback hurting them. And that was the case for Notre Dame last year, and all the big games against Ohio State, against Clemson. I mean, I guess he did well against Clemson. He was Sam Hartman had his best running game that almost kept him in the game, right? But obviously didn't have it against Louisville. And I think that is a type of thing that Notre Dame will have this year with Riley Leonard. And, you've done a bunch of, clips showing like how Mike Denbrock specifically has used the quarterbacks in the run game. How big of a deal do you think that will be for Notre Dame in 24? Just the ability to use the quarterback as a real running weapon.
Oh, I think it'll be huge, right? And this is even to discount like say like Steve Angeli won the job or anything too, because I think Steve Angeli will be used in the run game if he is Notre Dame's quarterback, right? Like I think Kenny Minchie would be, those guys will be used more than Sam Hartman is not. You're not designing runs for Sam Hartman. You're just not, right? Like, the most you're going to get is kind of what you got out of him this year, right?
Yeah.
So, and I think also too with Leonard specifically or Angeli, like you can run short yardage stuff with them, right? And that opens up a whole different, ball game of what you can do in certain instances. And so I think that is really big. And that opens up so much for the backs as well, because when teams have to account for it, it changes everything. It really does. Look at how every game this year where Notre Dame's defense, and obviously Notre Dame's defense did a fantastic job with these mobile quarterbacks all year. It's one of the reasons why they were so good this year is the jobs that they did and the plan they had for all these mobile quarterbacks. But like, you have to have a plan every week for it. And if you don't, then you're going to get burned, right? And so it just makes Notre Dame a harder team to defend, a harder team to prepare for, all of that. And I kind of want to transition it from there too, because the fact that they have Denbrock now, and the one thing that I'll say about Michigan and what they've done in the last, few years, specifically kind of like when they turned it around, they made the playoff the last 3 years and they won obviously this year. The big thing that they did was look at the beginning of the Harbaugh era offense. He went back to and he was obviously involved in it. For one, he was more involved in the offense in terms of him running things on offense early. And their offense was like Tim Drevno, like, Stanford O-line coach. He was the OC. And then it was Pep Hamilton, and they were in they were in a certain direction based on what Stanford and kind of that part of it. And really the offense kind of took off when they made the move to Sharon Moore. And so that was big. And Sharon Moore is absolutely, his stupid speech crying at the end of the whatever game, I think it was a Penn State game. Aside from that, the guy's a heck of an offensive coordinator, and he's a heck of an O-line coach, and he has absolutely elevated their offense. So they have an elite offensive coordinator, and on defense, Minter has done a fantastic job. Obviously, Minter was that just shows you too, like he was at Vandy, right? But originally before that, he was with the Baltimore Ravens. And prior to Minter coming over, it was another Mike McDonald.
It was
who's
Mike
now
McDonald, who's
was
like
the
the best
defensive coordinator.
DC in the NFL right now.
Yes. And so he literally was like, man, they went from Don Brown, Dr. Blitz, Don Brown, to going to like, you know, who's very specifically college, very specifically like, we're just, you know, we're running my system no matter what. And then them getting burned for it, to a pro level defensive coordinators that adapt and adjust to their opponents and are fluid with their scheme. And that took their defense up a huge notch. So that is my kind of leading it back to, well, now for the first time in a long time, you can say, wow, Notre Dame's got a guy at offensive coordinator, Mike Denbrock, and they have a guy at defensive coordinator in Al Golden, where you're like, wow, you know what? Notre Dame they can match up with anybody at offensive coordinator and defensive coordinator. And that wasn't the case. So that changes things. That is one thing that I if I'm looking at being optimistic about Notre Dame in 2024 and beyond or whatever, I'm looking at that part of it. And of course, that also leads into, hopefully Al Golden doesn't get hired as a defensive coordinator in the NFL and sticks around. And like, you know, Mike was mentioning on Power Hour this week, it's like, oh, it's agreed to, but we don't, you know, it's probably not signed.
Yeah, like he could even if he did sign it, I don't think that's any sort of, and we're talking about an extension for him. Even if he did sign it, what does that mean? He would get, if he gets offered a DC job in the NFL, like he'll probably take it. You know, who will be here? Will Falk's asking, like, how confident are we that Al Golden will be here? Like, if he gets offered an NFL defensive coordinator job, he's probably taking that, right? So that's just
it depends on the situation too.
It depends on the situation for sure, but like I don't think he would be offered if the situation didn't fit. You know what I mean? Like people don't go and interview for something where it's like, I don't know about this fit, right? So like, you know, how confident am I? I don't know. But here's the thing though, right? You just kind of said like they had Mike McDonald, and then he left, and then they went with Jesse Minter, who kept the same scheme going, right? Like, to me, if you have the scheme itself that works and that the players know and that you trust the players to be able to do it, then a move from Al Golden to someone like Mike Mickens should work out in theory. Like it wouldn't be like the sky is falling situation. You have to go get someone else from the outside. Like you have an internal situation. That's what Michigan did. Yeah. You know, if you have something,
you have Marcus Freeman there as well, you know.
Right. So if you have the scheme that you like and you have the players who can run that scheme and you trust Mickens to do it, I think you have, like, to me, it would be, in a way, it would be a downgrade of sorts just because you don't have that experience, right? The knowledge that Al Golden has. But
the in-game adjustments would be the biggest question.
Well, like it worked out, right? Like it worked out with Elko to Lee, right? Clark Lee had never called, but they had the scheme, and they had the players, and they had the scheme that they liked.
Sean Moore was
exactly. You know, so right? I think it should be okay, right? When you have a good, just kind of base and knowledge of what you want to do there. They don't have that on offense right now, but I think with Denbrock, it's someone that you know can teach it. You know he can teach it, right? He taught it at Notre Dame. He taught it at Cincinnati. He taught it at LSU. And then those results were really good, right? that's the thing that you can count on. It's like the guy knows how to, like his schemes are good, like you've been pointing out, right? And you've been showing on Twitter, like he schemes it up and he'll get the offense into really good situations. He also knows how to teach that stuff. And he also knows how to get his players into positions where like we can execute the things that you want us to execute. And that to me is like the biggest part of kind of all this is like, you got to be able to teach it. And I think Dan Brock is a guy that can do that. Right. What about let's talk about the offense, right? Notre Dame's offense. Just looking at it 2024 on paper right now, obviously super early. They haven't gone through spring practice, but we're just looking at paper. Where would you say Notre Dame is let's say top 4 caliber? To get into a situation where it's like, hey, you win the first round game and then you win, then you go into the playoffs. They're top 4 caliber on offense. Like what position groups would you say that they are top 4 caliber in?
I mean, tight end, 100%. Running back, I do think like, man, I mean, I know it's just one thing to get like excited about the bull. Like, I mean, Jeremiah Love and JD Price are going to be awesome next year.
Yeah.
Those guys are going to be fantastic. And like, who knows, maybe Keedron Young or like they're going to be great at running back.
Yeah.
Right. I would say those are the only 2 positions that I would say, no doubt they like, I would be confident they are like that caliber. Quarterback, I think like the whole thing is Leonard's ceiling and if he can reach that, right? Because if he does, then then you're talking about, him being there. And right now the offensive line, it's just a huge question mark going into the season where you just don't know, how good it's going to be. Like they're going to be above average on the offensive line. Like that, I feel confident in saying Notre Dame's going to be above average on the offensive line, but above average isn't good enough to be like you're actually going to
get.
You're going to get into.
I feel like they were above average this year.
Yeah, right.
Yeah,
and and you could even say like they were like, they were a top 20 offensive line for sure.
Yeah.
But I don't even know if they're going to be top 20 next year. We have to wait and see, right?
Yeah.
So a lot of that just depends on kind of development of some of these guys. Like there has to be signs of that in the spring where you're like, oh, this guy is at this level and this is where this guy is. And, in the spring to summer, right? Like that's where you have to kind of see it, because I understand like obviously Notre Dame is they're bringing back Howard Cross, they're bringing back Riley Mills, RJ Oben will be on camp, like, and it should be probably like a slog to run against Notre Dame's defense in the spring, in the summer. But if the O-line is getting whooped daily, that is a bad sign. Like that is like, you need to be winning more than, not dominating, but like showing enough there, right? So that has to be where they're at on the offense side. Because if Notre Dame just can't be that team, because at receiver, I think they're like a year away from being at that kind of next level. Like there is always the possibility that, man, you know what, Bo Collins, now that this guy's got like a decent quarterback, he takes a jump. And now that Chris Mitchell is this year's Juice Wells or Jamari Thrash is like a group of 5 guy who got in the right situation and boom, so maybe that's the case, right? Maybe Jaden Greathouse is just like to the sky, healthy Jane Thomas, whatever. But it's like so many of those things have to click for them to get at the level that there's too many things there.
Yeah.
So that's why I think like, and obviously too, people will be like, what about Cam Williams? It doesn't happen for freshmen, guys. It just doesn't. It doesn't happen for freshmen. There's very few dominant guys that are just right away. It flashes signs, but it just won't be at that quite level. What you hope is that he shows enough signs to do that as a sophomore, right? So that's why you say, hey, they're probably a year away, but I mean, we'll see. And obviously, too, they're still trying to add in the portal. So maybe they'll get another receiver, too, that can help do that. But I really just think it's on the offensive line to get there, because I just don't think they can't be like a top 8, right? Top 8 that's the threshold. You win a national championship, you got to be a top 8 offense, OF plus, right? Combined FEI and SP plus. To be that, they're not doing that unless the O line is like probably like an A minus or B plus at the very least.
Because here's the thing too, like you talked about the spring. Like, how good of springs are like Riley Mills and Howard Cross going to have? They're not coming back to have good springs, you know?
Yeah.
Like it's like, are they getting whooped by like Gabe Rubio or like Bubakar Traore? Jason Anya, like the guys like that. Because like Howard Cross, like they don't need to do a lot of spring stuff. They just don't, right? So like to me, it's more about like, how are they doing against those like second tier guys, right? Like Jordan Botelho, like he needs to have a good spring, right? He has a lot of stuff to work on. Josh Burnham, right? Is Josh Burnham dominating them? You know, that's a question. And Matt McCarthy said Notre Dame still needs to hope a quality grad transfer offensive tackle hits the portal. You can't like the odds at this point, right? Like whoever it was going to be, if it was going to happen, I think it already would happen. They already would have been in the portal. Like someone coming in post spring, it's possible.
We list her names,
right? It's possible, but I just don't think
not
that
likely.
It's like the odds of it are just way down. Like I think what they have is what they're going to have to go with, and that's the big question, right? Like I think if the offensive line is like A minus, then that bumps up the receivers too, right? Some receiving cores, like they basically can mitigate like a poor offensive line. Some can. But some, like you got to give them time to get open, right? They got to have time there. And if Notre Dame doesn't have that, I mean, it's just like yesterday, right? Like Washington had a bunch of, they had some opportunities for sure, but like they also weren't sure that they could really block Michigan. So they had a bunch of short bubble screens and all that other stuff. Jalen Polk doesn't really do anything. Adunze had a good game, but not a great game. McMillan had the touchdown catch, but not really much else, right? Like those are 3 really good wide receivers. That's one of the most explosive passing games in college football, and they couldn't get anything because they couldn't block those guys, right?
Yeah.
So, it's just like the receivers to me with a good offensive line. I think they can be top 4 caliber. I do, but without a good offensive line, I don't know that they're good enough to actually carry, kind of carry that, right? Like I don't think they're like, oh, we need to get like Bo Collins, like one-on-one with, top corner. And the same thing with Chris Mitchell. Like these are guys that could do damage, but you got to help them out. You got to have time for them to do those things. With Riley Leonard, like I'm pretty confident that he is playoff caliber, like top 4 caliber. I am. I just think what he could, like you said, like all that stuff he could bring in the run game, like that's so important, right? For any offense, and especially this one. Like I just think people look at it like okay, the legs, but how does he throw? It's like, no, the legs are super valuable and very important, right? He's a big, thick kid too. He's not slight. So it's like, I just think like that part of it is like so big, not in terms of like his NFL prospects. I don't really care. I don't care about his NFL prospects. How can he help Notre Dame? How can he help Notre Dame win games? And I think his legs are a big part of that. Going on to the defense, Jamie, like the defensive line. Okay. Like Michigan is not set 16 blitzes yesterday for Michigan. It's not a lot, right? Especially when you consider like Washington ran probably around like 70, 80 plays. Okay. Yeah. So like they're not blitzing a ton. Can Notre Dame get there? Can Notre Dame do that with 5 or with 4? It's just like, hey, you can't block us. But Alabama can't block us. Washington can't block. Washington won the Joe Moore Award. They can't block us, right? Like, can Notre Dame get to that point with the defensive line? Everyone's very excited about Howard Cross and Riley Mills coming back, and they should be, right? They absolutely should be. But can there be like a situation where Notre Dame is like dominating teams up front with these guys, or does it need to be someone like Boubacar Traore, right? And Josh Burnham taking a big leap? Like, is that what Notre Dame's hoping for up front?
I think they absolutely need that. Is like, you need, I mean, the one thing you could say with Notre Dame right now in the defensive line is I think there's several possibilities. They don't need as many things to go right as like when I mentioned the receivers. They don't need as many of these things to hit because a lot of things of them hit for them last year already, right? And then you got Cross and Mills back, like you said. And Oben is he's a good pass rusher. Like, he's going to help out immediately and be like, I would say, at least JJB level pass rusher. Like, I think that's, pretty, it's a pretty safe bet that he'll do that. It's the Viper position where is Jordan Botelho going to be healthy? And is he going to be able to kind of be closer to the guy that he was before, this past season when he was at the end of the 2022 season? Can Burnham take that jump and be like another guy there? Traore, you mentioned, like, Traore, like, is absolutely like, that's a guy that if Notre Dame, if you look at Notre Dame's pass rush take a jump, Traore has to be one of the big factors there because, man, he is one of the most talented edge rushers that Notre Dame has had since I've been doing this. They've had, a lot of dudes and guys who play in the NFL, and he's more talented than all of them. He really is. Like, it just in terms of raw talent and what he could be, that's the kind of thing. And then you have to see if, like, can they get more from like some of these other guys that are coming up too? Like, I don't know what, like, a guy like just randomly pick. Do I think Armel Mukum's going to be like a big guy? Probably not, but maybe, maybe he'll be like, just out of the list of these guys who are like from the next thing. Or Gobera, I think if he's healthy, I think he really has a chance to be like one of these guys who all of a sudden during the season, other teams were like, where did this guy come from? Like, who is this guy? Because he really has that incredible first step that can really put him there. I mean, Brandon Vernon, that's the one thing I don't see. Brandon Vernon is Jason Smith mentioned that he's not, I haven't seen anything from him as a pass rusher to think that he is going to be a dominant pass rusher. Now it's my biggest kind of question for me. I think he could be like a really, really, really high level player versus the run. I got to see more from him as a pass rusher. You got to see more from some of these other guys as pass rushers too. Or a guy like Kahanukia, who, do I know that he's whatever? I have no idea what to expect from him.
Could be any total wild card.
But if you told me at the end of spring, you're like, Kahanukia is going to start a Viper, I don't think I'd be shocked. You know what I mean? Like, because I really, during his freshman year, there were big time signs that he was going to be a player. Like,
there were rumblings.
There were definitely rumblings, and like very few guys that when you go in August, when I go there every August and get a chance to watch these guys, very few guys that have like really kind of like flashed in a way in that very first camp where you're like, oh, this guy's just like doing something where he's beating people that he's not supposed to beat in one-on-ones or something like that. You're like, it's like a 99.9% hit rate on those guys actually becoming players. So the question is just whether or not like he's ready to kind of do something as he's just coming back from mission and all that kind of stuff. But I think he's going to be a factor this year. Like my prediction is he will be in the rotation this year, and it's just kind of working it all out there. And Rajon mentioned Jason Onye. Like, I mean, I would have thought Jason Onye was going to have a bigger year than he was going to have this season, but he kind of just showed too. He's still a guy who hasn't played a lot of ball, so there's a lot of inconsistencies with his game. Physically, the guy is just a man child, right? So it's just, can he put it all together, right? Can Gabriel Rubio stay healthy? All these kind of things, right? It's just like all that kind of stuff is going to work out. But I think talent-wise, I mean, they're good on the defensive line. I will say someone brought it up on ISC Sport. What Notre Dame doesn't have is they don't have, like, if you look at Michigan, they got like a couple guys like 320-ish inside.
Yeah.
That's what Notre Dame doesn't have. And really that's what Notre Dame has struggled to kind of recruit and develop the most.
Yeah. The 320 guy, right? Like you need that, right? Like it's just important to have, especially when you can just bottle up the middle, the way that they can, right? And it's hard to find. And it's kind of the last piece, I guess, to a lot of D lines, right? Where it's like that's what they want Sean Civillano to be, right? Like it's like you just want that last kind of part of a D line that's kind of like a cherry on top. And like a cherry on top for your website, Jamie, could be something like VSR Media presenting you a video for your website or your social media page. That's just like the last final piece of what you're looking to do for your small business. And if you want to check something like that out, that's founded by Notre Dame football pregame host and Emmy award-winning anchor Vahid Sadrazadeh. VSR Media provides professional and cinematic video and photo. Whether you're looking for a collegiate or pro-level highlight reel, have a personal story to tell, or are aiming to diversify and grow your business, VSR Media specializes in short and long-form video storytelling, social media management, and website design. VSR Media also captures professional headshots, senior, and sports photos. Contact them at vsrmediacompany.com and mention Irish Sports Daily to receive 20% off your first project. Visit them online or give them a call at 574-800-9106. There was a comment here. Sparks, I guess, SPXRRKS. Do y'all do Collins? So I'm kicking around the idea of Collins right now. I'm against it just because I don't know what people are going to say on the Collins.
Who knows? Yeah.
Yeah. And it's just, it could kind of I think there is a place for it. So we're monitoring. Well, I'm monitoring the Collins situation. It might happen. We
could do the voicemail thing.
We could do voicemail things. We could do that. So I'm kicking that around. I need to persever, kind of ruminate on that a little bit. Just a little bit. That's what we're looking at. So we have the D line, right? The linebacker situation is interesting. There's just a ton of talent. It's like ranking talent, right? And you look at Jalen Sneed, you look at Drake Bowen, you look at Jay Nosbury, right? You have Jack Kaiser coming back. He's a fifth-year guy. You can hopefully, wherever he needs to play, he can play. Everyone kind of thinks Mike. I don't think that's going to happen, frankly. I think between Drake Bowen and the KVA situation is just
KVA is going to play this year.
That is interesting.
100%.
That is interesting. He is good. He is really good.
He's very good.
So that's something to monitor as well. Just kind of in the spring. I just went through the All-American game. He was basically a standout in every single practice, according to reports. So that's something to keep track of there. And it's kind of like you look at it and you think, well, how many spots are we actually talking about here, right? There's always talk about the rover. How often is Notre Dame in rover? Like they're just not, right? They're always a nickel. They're a big nickel team, and that's where they're at. And so it's like if it's just for two spots, I just feel like Notre Dame's going to be – they're going to at least have talent at that linebacker position. It's like guys who can have the size, have speed, just really good football players, right? And so, are they like championship caliber? I don't know. But it's kind of like if there's a position on the field that isn't like totally championship caliber, top 4 caliber, it is linebacker. They got to be able to just, in my opinion, they got to be able to just fit into what you're asking. from your defense. And then the kind of the big responsibility comes in places where Notre Dame is stronger, frankly. Well, what is your take on that?
Well, I think with a linebacker, I could see it being because of the talent. I could see the youth is why you think, and the inexperience is why you think. Like, I would say maybe like the first like third of the year, you could see a lot of ups and downs, and I think that is very normal. I think if you look back to like say Notre Dame's 2019 linebacker situation, if people recall that, I mean, especially that first week against Louisville, it was not a good week for the linebackers in that week. People recall Asmar Bilal, who obviously had played but hadn't played much at will linebacker, did not have a good game. Owusu Koromoa made flashy plays, but he also had some horrible run fits in the game. Drew White had a couple missed tackles in that game. It was not a good thing for the linebackers. And as the season went on, it became a strength. And that became like, oh, they're good at linebacker now, right? So I think I could see like almost like a similar trajectory for the linebackers where you're like, man, you see some of these like mistakes early because that's what you see from guys that are younger, right? You see like poor run fits, you see just, bad block destruction, like these kind of things happen, for younger guys because they haven't played as much, whatever. That's just, it's different when you see, like how JD Bertrand became an infinitely better blitzer in his last year because he just, I don't know if it was just film study or whatever, the timing of his blitzes were just so much better. And he became so much more disruptive because of that. And obviously you saw with Maris too, was like a way better blitzer last year too, right? And that is like experience, ends up being a big part of that. So I guess the question is like, is there going to be like growing pains? How big are those growing pains going to be early? And also, who are going to win the jobs? Like, who's going to win it? Because I really think it's kind of wide open there. Jack Kaiser will play. Where is he going to play? Is he going to start the whole season? Because I don't think it's like a done deal that he's like a for sure starter the whole season. Probably, but not 100% to me. And then it's like Jalen Sneed. Could Jalen Sneed be a linebacker? Or is he just a sub-package piece?
Yeah.
And probably a better sub-package piece than he was this year. But it would be a big deal if he could actually play linebacker. And to me, he's not close to that yet. And he really needs that's a guy who's absolutely needs a big spring. And I mean, I could see like Bowen coming out and like establishing himself as like, man, this is the mic and all this. And I could see KVA all of a sudden, you're like, KVA is going to play. And all of a sudden, maybe KVA mid-season or a couple games of the season, you're like, KVA starting. Like that could all happen. So to me, it's like the biggest enigma of like what could happen there. But talent-wise, like, I don't even know if Jaden Osbury might not lead the team of tackles next year, right? It's very wide open. It's very wide open, and I'm interested to see how all these guys, physically and technically develop.
It's one of the more fascinating positions, like going into the spring and coming out of spring and in the fall and everything, like how that's all going to get sorted. Because, like you said, a ton of talent, a ton of like physical traits for just a couple spots. So that's going to be interesting to monitor. And then the secondary, I think Rod Hurd, there was an update, the transfer DB from Northwestern. Christian had an update on him. I suggest everyone goes to the irishsportsdaily.com message board to check that out. It's still posted up there. That read pretty positive to me. Just the way that Christian writes, I was looking for some keywords, some flash words from him. And that sounds pretty positive to me. So I'm personally feeling pretty good about Rod Hurd and him ending up at Notre Dame. If he ends up in the secondary, to me, You talked about it with Mike on Power Hour yesterday. I think he's a safety for sure. I think you're right. I think he played nickel as just someone who needed to play nickel. I think he's going to be a safety. I think he works really well next to Xavier Watts, right? And I think they needed that. I think they needed just kind of like a second guy there. And then you can bring along someone like Adon Schuler, right? Who I think they like. And I like his physical traits, but he's just got a lot to learn there for the position. It takes a little bit. So I think that's going to solidify things there. It's very interesting to me what Notre Dame wants to do with nickel, because they brought in Jordan Clark. Okay. I think he can play the position, right? But in my opinion, the question that I have is like, they're not, I don't think they want Jaden Mickey at nickel, and he's been playing the field. So like, who would you rather have out there in nickel? If you think like, who's better on the field there? Is it better to have like Jaden Mickey out there, or is it better to have Jordan Clark out there? Because to me, Christian Gray is a starter. I don't know how he doesn't start next year. I don't. But I also think like if anyone's going to be inside, would you rather be him or would you rather be Jordan Clark? Like, he has to be out there, right? So to me, it's like, is it better to have Christian Gray to the field and Jordan Clark at nickel, or is it better to have Jaden Mickey at field and Christian Gray at nickel? Like, to me, that's the question. Obviously, Ben Morrison is on the boundary, and that's where he's going to be, right? So that to me is the ultimate kind of where does Notre Dame want to go there, right? That's the question. I think Morrison and Gray are going to be awesome. I think they're going to be really, really good. And also there's Clarence Lewis, right? That CFB Hertz is asking for. But like, Notre Dame was wanting to play Clarence Lewis, then you wouldn't really need to go out and get Jordan Clark, right? So where are you at with that whole conversation, Jamie?
I mean, I would say right now that I would lean towards Jordan Clark being the starting nickel. And that I kind of think that they will just keep Mickey outside and just keep him there and just be like, he'll be an outside corner and that's it. Like, he's going to be a field corner basically.
Yeah.
And I do think that it'll be Gray. And as of right now, I would say I think just Christian Gray is just too talented. I just think he's going to be a starter. Or at the very minimum split the position or whatever. And like, but I would say that at nickel, I think it'll be Clark. But I mean, I'm not sleeping on like Micah Bell being someone who plays at nickel this year, right? Because to me, he is a guy that like, he has the because they've recruited well enough at like outside corner, they can kind of groom him to be just a nickel and just be like that nickel player for, that specific spot this whole time. And I mean, to me, he's one of these like weirdly, no one's talking about him, but I'm almost the most excited to kind of see him in the spring, to kind of see where he's at, because I think he is a perfect fit there athletically. And, you had that whole thing with Sean Crawford when you interviewed him, talking about those running backs who became whatever, and the physicalities with it. Obviously, it was with garbage time at the end of the thing, but he had a nice little blitz at the end of the bowl game as well. But I just really like his potential there. And he's just a fantastic athlete. So, I mean, to me, he's very much a dark horse there. And I think Clarence Lewis, I really hope that Clarence Lewis is just still there, because I just think it's valuable to have a guy like that around and still just be like a veteran guy there, because they're pretty young. Like, Ben Morrison, I know Ben Morrison is, he's started 2 years and he's going to be a high pick and whatever, but it's like, they're young. It's like X Watts and him are like the old guys in the room now, right? Like, they don't have a lot, which is also too why bringing in Clark and bringing in Hurd, because even though they're not like old in the system, it's guys who just like have like little tricks of the trade, kind of like little things that they see that they can help teach some of the younger guys. That stuff is so important, especially to me at DB, because there's just so many little things that like, I mean, I don't want to call it cheating, but it is cheating, to just grabbing guys a certain way and having it not get called and all this, right? Like there's a lot of these like little savviness that goes with it that makes you, that you don't do, or you do incorrectly as a young guy, that you learn to do better as an older guy who's played more, and to have those guys around. I think that's valuable, right? Which is why I always think it's always a good thing to bring in DBs in the portal, because it's just like you can just absorb and have that and bring that along with you.
And you know that they know how to handle like route combinations and things of that. You know, like that, because that really matters. And like to your point though about like an experienced guy, like Ben Morrison's been in the program for 3 years, right? Like obviously he has a ton of experience, but he doesn't have the type of experience that Clarence Lewis has. Like Clarence Lewis has gone through like the ups and downs of being like a Notre Dame football player in the secondary, right? Ben Morrison doesn't know any of that. Like, oh, I showed up and I was awesome, and I've been the guy for this entire time. Like I can't. How can he help like a Don Schuler go through stuff, or like Micah Bell, right? Like he doesn't know, right? But Clarence Lewis does, right? So, and same with Xavier Watts. Like that's why, you know, that's why it's so big that obviously Xavier Watts is a great player, but it's also big from a, you know, a leadership standpoint. I mean, Xavier Watts is going to be a captain next year, like 100%.
Yeah.
So like, it's just that's why like guys like that are invaluable to the program. Same thing with Jack Kaiser, by the way. Like it's the same kind of like, just like, hey, you can, young player can go to him and be like, hey, I don't know how I feel about X thing. Like what, tell me how it was for you. And it's like, he can talk about that. Right. That's why it's important to have guys like Kaiser and Lewis come around or hang around, where it's like they can help me get through things, right? And it's not just their utility as a football player, but also as a leader on the team, and being a part of the group there.
Clarence Lewis had to defend Devontae Smith in the college football playoff.
Yeah.
Like he's been around a while.
Yeah,
he's been around a while, right? So I think it's just you know, and the one thing is too is that like, because the guy get cooked by Alec Pierce, or you know, he get beat by Drake London. By the way, guys who are cooking guys in the NFL right now,
they're NFL players.
Yeah, like he's a good football player. He's not elite at the kind of level, whatever. Obviously, there's a difference between him and a guy like Ben Morrison, but a lot of guys, Clarence Lewis could start on a lot of Power 5 football teams. Could.
And then you put him in the bowl game, and it's like, we'll put in Clarence Lewis, right? Like Thomas Harper, like there's that are better option, but then Thomas Harper opts out, and it's like, oh, we'll put in Clarence Lewis, and it'll be all right, you know. And it was. So that's kind of a big deal. Another part to this with Notre Dame 2024, we're going to end it with this, is like the schedule sets up good for them, right? Like some of these teams that are going to the Big Ten, right? Like USC's schedule is a bear. Like Michigan's schedule is tough now, right? There's not going to be a bunch of undefeated teams at the top of college football in 2020.
I don't think so.
It's just not set up that way, right? It's going to set up completely different, right? So I think the schedule sets up really well for Notre Dame, which is obviously a big factor in how these things turn out. Jamie, I think we could leave it there. That was a good show. Good to be back. Happy to be back doing the shows. Happy to be back. We're going to be back with a regular schedule for the foreseeable future. So thank you, everyone, for tuning in. If this is your first time catching us, please subscribe to the channel. Please hit the like button. Please hit the notification bell so you know whenever it is we are going live. Links to the podcast are in the description below. I didn't do this to start the show, Jamie. Little rusty. I gotta lock it in for as we go forward. So we'll be back Thursday talking about something. Maybe we could do a mailbag. Maybe it's a good time to do a mailbag show, Jamie. So we'll do a mailbag on Thursday. We'll put the link out for the ISD subscribers on our message board. So if you want to ask a question, subscribe to irasportsdaily.com. It's really good content, really good stuff coming. Have a good day, everyone. We'll talk to you soon. Keep hitting and hustling.